time permits. So, with that, I would absolutely like to welcome Dr. Isaac Goldzser, who is now at Henry Ford Health in their Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorder Center. Dr. Goldzser is a neurologist that has completed his fellowship in movement disorders at the University of Pittsburgh. I believe he originally hails from Ann Arbor and came back to Michigan. So without further ado, Dr. Isaac Goldzser.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. I am very, very grateful to you and Michigan Parkinson Foundation for all the work that you do and for bringing me here. And I don't know if I think it's a little good and a little bad that we have so much attendance, right? It's good because um, you really are the most important person in your care journey, and what you find out and the information that you gather, that's what's going to shape this entire journey that you're on, your health journey, and nobody has more power than you. And so that's good, but maybe it's bad because it underscores the problem that we have of the Parkinson epidemic. And that's really what that book that you're going to be reading is about, Ending Parkinson's. That's Ray Dorsey, Michael Oken, and Boss Blom, who are some of my uh, absolute legends in the field and people that I try to learn from as much as I can. You'll see a lot of my talk is taken from that book, so definitely read it. My first slide from 460 BC. Let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. That's the great Greek physician, Hippocrates, whose oath we still take. So over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to try to make the case that your diet is really the most powerful lever that you have to prevent or slow Parkinson's disease. I'm also going to try to highlight that it's not so much what you do eat, it's more what you don't. I think it's important that I underscore how genetics have become the center of research for Parkinson's, but we can't control that, not yet. And so I really think there are things more important, the things we can control, like what we eat and how we move our bodies. This slide is scary to look at, but what I want you to focus on is the tiny word all the way over here on the right, which is just above the word today. And it says humans. That's our branch of the tree. Everything else, all the way along the top of the graph, is what's alive today.
What he's talking about.
So this is a map of all life on Earth. We make up one branch. Every other branch is a species that exists. And what you can see is about half of the branches are microorganisms, bacteria, prokaryotes, fungi, archaea, and you'll see how important these are for our health as I continue with the talk. Some definitions: alpha-synuclein. This is the Darth Vader of Parkinson's, our chief enemy, the bad guy. It's the pathophysiologic hallmark of Parkinson's, but also Lewy body disease and MSA, or multiple system atrophy. I'll also be talking about the microbiome, which I briefly mentioned. That's the microorganisms, bacteria, archaea, viruses, believe it or not, and fungi that live in and on you. Always. If they're not, you're sick. And anyone who's ever had a course of antibiotics knows this very well, because it doesn't just kill what you want it to kill. The MDS UPDRS, many of you will be familiar with. This is a measurement system we use to grade the severity of Parkinson's symptoms, and I'll bring it up when I discuss some studies later on. So what is inside of our gut? Well, 100 trillion bacteria. That's just the bacteria. There are archaea, fungi, and viruses that all have important roles. And what are those roles? Well, mostly digestion and immune functions. What's fascinating is it's not just that there are 100 trillion bacterial cells, so organisms living inside and on us. It's also they have 100 times more genetic material than we do. So it's these genes, when they're activated and inactivated by the foods we eat and by our exercise, by our exposure to our environment, by our genetics, that determine how our disease progresses, whether or not we get disease, and our overall state of health. Most of what lives in your gut has been determined since you were 3 years old. It's mostly the mode of birth, so vaginal birth, over cesarean, access to breast milk. Seem to be the most important things that determine our colonization patterns. Also, what we've been doing, what researchers have been doing is looking at the diversity, not just what's in there, but how much of one, how much of another population. And that diversity of the gut flora seems to be a marker of health, not just of gut health, but of overall wellness. There have been studies linking a loss of that diversity to autism, immune dysfunction, neurodegeneration, and as we know, Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative process. But how much don't we know? Look at this graph on the right. You can see 40% of the genetic material that we pull out of the gut when we check, we can't match it to anything we've identified before. We don't even know what's going on in there. It's like the ocean. There's things living down there and we don't know what they are. It's like outer space. Importantly, the diets that seem to promote diversity are high protein, high fruit, and fermented foods. I'll mention which of those I like. The low diversity gut flora is more of the Western diet. Added sugar, highly processed foods, and low protein. I mentioned what the gut flora does. It's essential for breaking down plants. So if you eat vegetables, fruits, anything with fiber, that's what breaks it down. There's nothing else that can do it. Peristalsis doesn't do it. There's an important role in immune homeostasis, so allowing things in that need to get in and not allowing things we don't want in. We don't want harmful microbes. We do want nutrition. And if you don't have the right bacteria, you won't get nutrition. But there's also this two-way communication that takes place, this vagus nerve, which is just an absolutely fascinating story in itself. The wanderer, vagus is wanderer in, I believe, Latin. And the two-way communication, the brain talking to the gut via the vagus nerve, but also the gut signaling, am I healthy? Am I unhealthy? Is it time to panic? Based on the state of the gut and the gut flora. So one of the most fascinating questions has long been, does Parkinson's start in the gut? And my mentor at Pitt said flat out, not a chance. But these studies from Scandinavia in the 90s and 2000s were fascinating. They looked at tens of thousands of people, including about 5,000 who had had what was called a vagotomy, where the vagus nerve was completely transected or partially transected in order to treat people with peptic ulcers. What they found was when they looked over time that many more of the people who had had this surgery did not get Parkinson's disease. When the data was reanalyzed, there are some concerns and some people are not as impressed. I will absolutely admit that, but it is still fascinating to imagine knowing that alpha-synuclein is found in high volumes in the gut, that misfolded alpha-synuclein, this bad guy, this Darth Vader, is found in the gut. What if it was climbing up the vagus nerve? Well, guess where the vagus nerve connects to the brain? It's the brainstem. It's the part of the brain that degenerates in Parkinson's disease. So I think while this is far from definitive, it is certainly fascinating to think about. Now, this brings me to my next story, which is the story of how I ended up in Pittsburgh studying Parkinson's disease. And what I want to highlight is that Tim Greenemeyer was one of my mentors there. And he was the first person to develop a mouse model of Parkinson's. But his mouse model wasn't It wasn't just a mouse that walked funny, okay, or moved slow. He developed a mouse model that had Lewy bodies, so alpha synuclein inclusions, in the part of the brain in the midbrain in the substantia nigra correlate area that had Parkinsonism based on the definitions at the time and had loss of the neurons that we lose in Parkinson's disease in humans. So one of the best models of Parkinson's in a murine species, in a mouse, in a mammal, I would say. How did he do it? Well, he remembered another older story, which is also fascinating. And this is the story of the bathtub MPTP. And many of you will know that in the 70s or 80s, there was a group of college students in California who were trying to make methamphetamine or heroin in their tub, in their bathtub. I think that's how the story goes. But they made a mistake. They didn't carry a one. Maybe they subtracted the wrong value. They didn't get the extraction right, and they made a chemical called MPTP. And what happened was that at UCLA and at the medical centers where they showed up with acute Parkinson's. And these people were in their 20s, and it was obviously very concerning because this hadn't been seen since encephalitis lethargica, the Parkinson's that took place after the Spanish flu in 1918, and was sort of talked about in the Oliver Sacks book, Awakenings, which was turned into a movie also by Robin Williams. But the point being that the way he did this was he knew about MPTP, which was a pesticide, basically resembled a pesticide, and was a complex 1 inhibitor. It inhibited mitochondria. And so what he did was he pumped rotenone into the rats, into the mice, slowly. So he gave them a very slow dose over the course of months, mimicking what people would be exposed to if they worked in farming or if they ate foods that were sprayed with these type of chemicals. Now, what did I do on the right here? What's this image? Well, these are all the foods that are most likely to be sprayed by complex 1 inhibitors. Now, I'll talk about later that organic foods are healthier. But if you're eating inorganic almond milk, if you're not washing your fruits, watch out. They use this stuff on fruits in order to prevent mites, and mites are inhibited by the complex 1 inhibitors that are used. So we'll get into that a lot more later. But this was the reason I ended up in Pittsburgh studying with Tim Greenemeyer, because I was interested in environmental causes of Parkinson's disease. So how can I continue to argue for food being the most important? Well, we need a new pyramid. This is our wellness pyramid for Parkinson's, for any disease, I would argue. And nutrient-dense food forms the basis, forms the bottom. The second tier is movement and exercise, then sleep and stress management, and finally, this kind of concept of biohacking and nootropics. But what is it about the microbiome in Parkinson's? Has anyone studied it? Well, absolutely. So there's a lot of studies now which are just taking, well, poop, fecal material, and analyzing the genetic material within it. And they get a lot of information. So does the gut flora, the microbiome in Parkinson's, look any different from the gut flora or microbiome in controls? And it very much does. The studies have found that there are different organisms, that there are less variety. Some people have made connections to this concept of leaky gut, which is this kind of inflammatory syndrome. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Obviously, we know about constipation, but there are a number of other intestinal conditions that are higher incidence in people before in prodromal Parkinson's. Some people are interested in short chain fatty acid production and whether this causes inflammation as well. So, what do we do about it? That's what we all want to know. Well, obviously, we're not going to be cutting vagus nerves. This is not certainly not the way to go. We need a vagus nerve. We need to be able to communicate with the gut to tell it to speed up, slow down. But what about probiotics? Well, it's certainly an idea. Um, be aware, the biggest risk is probably to your pocketbook, that a lot of these probiotics are killed in the stomach. There's also probiotics that contain a lactobacillus that helped, and then there's other probiotics that contain um, bacteria that actually break down levodopa and prevent its absorption. So they have um, carboxylase enzyme. So basically, ask your doctor. Do your research. What about prebiotics? Well, prebiotic means fiber. That's really the way to think about it. Many people think this is very important for gut health. I think there's strong evidence to suggest it is, and there's other people who are not as excited about it. Certainly, avoiding antibiotics would be good if you don't need them. And then what about fecal transplants? Another thought for many diseases right now. Certainly in C. diff, it's sort of become the standard of care in Europe and other places. This brings us up to the topic of autonomic dysfunction in Parkinson's. So we know that this is a multi-system disease. This affects every part of your body, not just your brain, not just your movement, but every single function. And would be good if doctors knew this more. Certainly, patients know. And so this alpha-synuclein, this bad guy, it's widely observed. It's in the peripheral nervous system, which is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems that control the automatic functions of your body. But it's also in the enteric nervous system. So your gut has its own nervous system, actually, with as many neurons as your brain, believe it or not. Still, the culprit or mechanism that's leading to autonomic failure in PD has not been identified. Some people think it's alpha-synuclein, but it's not totally clear. As we all know, non-motor symptoms are very hard to treat. They tend to be underappreciated and cause significant quality of life disruption. These need to be routinely surveilled for, and that's one of the reasons to go see a movement specialist. Is I think these folks have been shown in multiple studies to keep a higher index of suspicion for non-motor features. To underline that, 89% of Parkinson's patients have GI symptoms prior to the onset of motor symptoms. And these rotenone models, the rodent model I talked about earlier, it had the pathophysiologic hallmarks of Parkinson's. So it had alpha-synuclein and Lewy bodies, but there was also dysautonomia and neuronal loss in the enteric nervous system with alpha-synuclein aggregates. What about constipation? Well, this is absolutely one of the most common non-motor symptoms. We treat first by recommending more exercise. You got to move to move. I say that all the time. Even chair yoga can be a big help, but stretches and twists are really the most beneficial. If you're walking 5,000 to 7,000 steps a day, it's very unlikely that you'll be constipated. I think that's really the most important recommendation. But fiber and water can help. Miralax is a PEG containing osmotic laxative, and then Mozapride I haven't used much, but Michael Oken talks about it. And certainly probiotics have also shown efficacy. I'll talk later about some fermented foods, which could help with constipation, but could also help restore your gut flora and maybe slow your disease. So what are the GI problems in Parkinson's? Not just constipation, dysphagia, so problems with swallowing. We know that this is certainly something we can encounter. This is partially due to poor muscular control, so the muscles don't move properly. That's bradykinesia. And then also there's this dysautonomia, so it's harder to propel the food. Soft foods can be easier to eat. Certainly levodopa could help. There's also this parasympathetic failure which could contribute to problems, GI problems like delayed emptying and gastric motility. This is the most important piece, I think, in the entire lecture. If you are constipated, you cannot absorb your levodopa properly. If you are not pooping once a day, your levodopa is not properly being absorbed. And it's because it's absorbed in the small intestine. So the rate of emptying of the stomach is determined by what's downstream. If your stomach, and like I said, there's an enteric nervous system. It's talking to it. It knows. You might not know, but it knows that the large intestine is full. So the small intestine doesn't move properly. So the stomach doesn't empty properly. Well, what's the problem with that? Your medicine sits in your stomach, doesn't go to the small intestine, doesn't get absorbed on time, leads to no-ons or dose failures, and delayed ons, certainly, or prolonged off periods. So what do we do? Well, stopping anticholinergic drugs is a big one. We know that anticholinergics are sort of block digestion. We think of acetylcholine as being the rest and digest molecule, and the molecule of the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you're on Artane, if you're on anticholinergics, that would be one of the first things to consider. Similar to if you developed cognitive problems, memory impairment. Similarly, we would really strongly consider reducing or eliminating Artane. Thinking about reducing or eliminating amantadine, adding fluids, fruit, fiber, lactulose, Miralax, and apomorphine injections have been used as well, in addition to these common meds. So what about probiotics versus prebiotics? I mentioned both earlier. Tyrosine decarboxylase enzyme, that's in E. faecalis, which actually metabolizes and breaks down levodopa. Well, what's the problem with that? Some probiotics have it. So make sure that your probiotic doesn't contain E. faecalis if you're taking it or planning to take it and you have Parkinson's. Chronic use of levodopa seems to upregulate E. faecalis. So what does that mean? It means that everything exists in homeostasis. Your body, when you're taking a drug, works to break that drug down faster. The more of it you take, the more that your body wants to break it down. And that's just the nature of homeostasis and the organism. We live in this constant balance, and the more we I think this is actually one of the mechanisms of increased need for higher doses of medication later in disease as well. This study was literally just comparing a regular milk to fermented milk. One of my favorites fermented foods is kefir. I like unsweetened goat milk kefir. I think it's awesome. Tastes great to me. And they literally just compared folks with regular milk to kefir for controlling constipation. And obviously the fermented milk worked much better. So how is levodopa absorbed? This slide is rough, but I think the main points to make are that there's a lot going on. We all know about amino acids competing with levodopa. So protein gets broken down into amino acids in the stomach, and those amino acids get absorbed in the small intestine. The transporter that takes this amino acids up is the large amino acid transporter. So LAAT, that's this pink one. And the pink one is bringing up the levodopa. That's success. So right here, you can see a molecule of levodopa going through the large amino acid transporter, successfully getting into your bloodstream. Well, what's happening over here? These are amino acids in dietary protein. This is the reason that we say maybe don't eat a huge protein meal with your levodopa dose. Maybe take it 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after, if you want max effect. But there's other processes going on as well. So you can see that there's this molecule, amino acid decarboxylase, on a bacteria. These are the bacteria in the gut, in the lumen, swimming around. Depends on what you eat. And this is breaking down a molecule of L-DOPA into dopamine. What's the problem with that? Dopamine doesn't get absorbed through the lumen. So it's blocking absorption. It's reducing the efficacy of the drug you're taking. Similarly, that same the amino acid decarboxylase, same enzyme, is also on the lumen of the gut, breaking it down. And so, what can we do to limit this from taking place and maximize our absorption? So, we talked a lot about these fecal samples. They do this gene sequencing called 16S RNA gene sequencing. That's sort of the cutting edge right now. This paper is from April of last year, diet and gut microbiome in patients with Parkinson's. And they also did a diet quality index where they asked people what they were eating. They found that people that were eating more quality food, whole foods, healthy foods, and people with higher fiber intake had more anti-inflammatory strains of bacteria, like Butyrococcus and Coprococcus. People that were eating high added sugar, like juices, sugary sodas, and foods with high sugar, maltodextrin, there's all different code words for it, you'll see, had more of these pro-inflammatory bacteria like Klebsiella. Now, before I go on to the next slide, I keep on saying the word inflammation, and I think people get scared by that word, but we shouldn't be scared of it because there is an upstream mediator of the degeneration of neurons in the substantia nigra. And so we're losing these cells, and there is absolutely alpha-synuclein in most people with Parkinson's. There are some genetic varieties of Parkinson's that don't accumulate alpha-synuclein, don't form Lewy bodies. But what is causing that protein to misfold? What is causing those cells to die? I think it's far from clear that it is the alpha-synuclein itself that's causing the cells to die. That's directly neurotoxic. It's certainly possible that it could be a response to something else, some upstream mediator, and that is inflammation. And so what's causing inflammation? And that's why I'm so passionate about this topic. That's why I think diet is really where we need to go in the field. And I'll move on to the next slide. So this is a slide that I think this graph on the right is very powerful. I think the graph on the left is slightly less powerful, but this graph on the right shows the amount of glyphosate by county in Washington. So they basically looked at a state of Washington. They mapped out where farmers were using glyphosate, which is Roundup, and where people were not. Glyphosate, you can think of it as being similar to complex 1 inhibitor. It's not been proven to cause Parkinson's in experimental animals, but it sure resembles the pesticides that do. Okay, so let's put it that way. What they found is that there's this powerful link between, or powerful correlation, I would say, between the amount of glyphosate by county and the age-adjusted rates of Parkinson's disease. And so I thought that was, and the premature death even of Parkinson's in the state of Washington. So what we know is that the closer you were to the glyphosate, Roundup, and Paraquat is still used, both. So both glyphosate, Roundup, you can find it on the shelf, and Paraquat is still used, predicted early mortality from Parkinson's. So how close you were made you more likely to die of Parkinson's. Also, we know that we're using more and more of this stuff, and it has to do with genetic modification. I was, my mom's been warning me about genetic modified crops for decades, and I never thought it was a concern. We're going to better living through chemistry. This stuff is going to feed the world. We need bigger crops. We need more rice. But that's not the problem. The genetic modification is not the problem. It's not that there's added genes or subtracted genes. It's the genes that they are adding, which allow these crops to survive massive amounts of pesticide. That's what they're doing. They're adding genes that allow this one crop to survive so that they can use it to eliminate all the weeds in the field. But it's not just the de-weeding, which is really fascinating. They actually use some of these pesticides, for example, on cotton and wheat as a desiccant. So they use it to dry out the crop before harvest. It's it was shocking to me to hear that we were doing that, but covered very well in the Ending Parkinson book and definitely worth a read. So the use of glyphosate has exploded. We're using it on crops that get up into the animal feed, and it gets into our water, and we need to seriously think about how we're going to avoid it and how we're going to feed the world really without poisoning, mass poisoning ourselves. This one is a MRI of the brain. It has the classic changes associated with manganism. Manganism is a heavy metal exposure to manganese, and you can see the basal ganglia has these 2,2 flare hyperintensities, mostly in the putamen and the globus pallidus and thalamus. And what we know is pesticides have 2.5-fold. The paraquat has exposure to pesticides like paraquat increase your risk of Parkinson's by 2.5-fold. That solvents make like a 6-fold risk in workers like TCEs. That's really a big story in the Ending Parkinson's book. And that's the story of Camp Lejeune. So Camp Lejeune water was poisoned with trichloroethylene, still used in dry cleaners today. If you're getting your clothes dry cleaned, find an organic dry cleaner or just start wearing, I don't know, pajamas, because it really is a big deal. The heavy metals we just mentioned, air pollution has been really studied recently and is quite interesting. And then the well water. So how do we avoid it? Well, wash your food off, buy organic, get a water filter, get a reverse osmosis filter. Um, don't don't be a farmer. Um, Limit the trichloroethylene use. It's like a paint thinner. So if you're using paint thinner, make sure to have the proper PPE. Test your water, ventilate, and then for heavy metals, certainly you want to not be a welder. The air, HEPA filters, not living by a highway, exercising, and using antioxidants. All right. What about glyphosate and pesticides on corn, wheat, and soy? One of my biggest recommendations to my patients when they come in, this is like sacrilege to say in Michigan. I can't wait to see what the chat looks like after I say this. Don't eat corn, wheat, and soy in the US. I mean, I really think that would be a powerful lever to pull for your health. But personally, those are the foods I try to reduce in my diet, my family's diet, because they tend to be the most genetically modified and the most sprayed. And on the right, I put this kind of cheeky, hateful eight seed oil diagram. It's not so much the seed oils as being, worse for you, although they probably are. They're quite inflammatory and volatile, and highly processed with hexane, et cetera. But it's that they're condensing pesticide residues, and this has all been tested. When you test corn oil, you can get measurable levels of paraquat. When you test canola oil, sunflower oil, soy oil, same deal. So just don't cook with these. Use avocado oil to cook if you want to put a nice sear on your meat or your vegetables, and drizzle with olive oil, extra virgin. What about the actual numbers? Yeah, 90% of corn is genetically modified to resist glyphosate and paraquat. 94% of soy is genetically modified in the US, had high glyphosate residues. Wheat, they use glyphosate or Roundup to dry out the wheat before they harvest it so that they can do it with machines instead of having to do it by hand. 2018 study showing glyphosate exposure increased risk by 1/3 to Parkinson's, paraquat, 250% risk, and neuronal toxicity from this other complex 1 inhibitor. So what do we do? Well, if you have to eat it, go organic, and overall reduce your processed food intake, because these oils and these grains are ubiquitous in processed food. That's how they put calories into the food that is designed to feed America, is with these additives. just a couple bonus slides for you. My favorite supplements. I know a lot of people are interested in this. Maybe I'll do a whole talk on it. Um, I like creatine, especially for women, especially for vegetarians and people who don't like to eat a lot of meat. I like CoQ10. That's a big one from Shana Krostevska. I've seen that in a lot of the patients that she's seen. And vitamin D, obviously, we all have to get outside more. This was found to be low in, I think, 70% of people who ended up in the ICU with COVID. Omega-3 fatty acids, absolutely. You can get it from diet, though. And then some emerging supplements, and acetylcysteine and mucuna, which I think a lot of people have heard of. So my summary, constipation is common, underrecognized, undertreated, and it can interfere with the absorption of your medications. The dietary interventions are low risk. They could include adding prebiotics, which is fiber, or probiotics, which are, for me, my favorites are the living foods like kefir, kimchi, and kombucha. The diets that promote dysbiosis, which is the loss of helpful bacteria, look like the Western diets with sugar, dyes, and highly processed foods. And a reasonable approach to slow down or prevent Parkinson's could include dietary changes, exercise regimen, and avoiding common environmental risk factors like dry cleaners, farms, well water, and air pollution. With that, I will pause and check the chat.
I think someone just commented they've been seed free for years and they don't eat fast food either, which is great. That's the whole point, right?
Definitely. I mean, I think also the perfect is the enemy of the good. So, you know, there's, there's days where you might just need a Whopper with cheese and you did it and that's okay. Get back on the horse. Don't do it the next day.
Right. So if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat or even maybe use the raise hand feature. And we have
This
another.
is a great question about LRRK2. Um, let's see. So the first one I saw was which pro or prebiotic do I recommend? One that doesn't include E. faecalis and one that's not too expensive. Um, but mainly I would say eat living foods. I think the bioavailability in food is going to be much higher than in any pill or capsule or anything. Same thing goes for B12. Same thing goes for iron. The next question, great one on LRRK2. Does that overcome great diet? No. It's all of the above strategy, right? You've got, a serious uh, kind of enemy, right? There's a big enemy, which is you're going to be predisposed to having Parkinson's and may already have, but that doesn't mean that you can't try to save as many cells as you can. And so the, no matter what the genetic syndrome is, it's going to be putting metabolic pressure on your dopaminergic neurons. So what can you do to prevent that? What can you do to try to save them? Keep them alive as long as you can. And so I would say anti-inflammatory diet, as much exercise as you can get safely, and maybe even some of these living foods or probiotics. What studies have been done on the ketogenic diet using HVM? Ketone supplement originally started in trials at U of FL. Yeah, Michael Oken's a genius. University of Florida's a great place. Definitely sort of my legends. I think ketogenic diet is going to be huge for epilepsy. I think for Parkinson's, it's not as clear, and maybe also big for cancer. I think cancer really thrives on free sugar, and if you're able to live on ketone bodies, that's quite an interesting thought. But those aren't my areas of expertise. I haven't read anything on it for Parkinson's. Thoughts on visiting a functional medicine doctor? Yeah, I mean, I like integrative medicine. I call myself an integrative Parkinson specialist. I trained with integrative specialists in South Florida, and I think they're great. The risk is you really you want somebody who can do both. So find somebody who knows the medicine, knows the drugs, but who's also willing to try, because frankly, the medicines aren't perfect. You know, we can we can treat symptoms, but we're not curing disease in Parkinson's yet. And so since that's the case, um, since we haven't found a disease modifying agent, it's all of the above strategy for me. You know, it's let's try it. Um, you heard about that? Let's look into it. Let's learn more. Um, do drugs like omeprazole affect gut microbiome? Big time. I'm not a fan of omeprazole. First of all, PPIs, they don't treat the root cause of GERD, right? So the lower esophageal sphincter, which is supposed to keep the acid out of your mouth and in your stomach, it stays closed when acid levels are high. If you block acid levels, sure, the stuff that ends up in your mouth won't be as sour tasting, but it'll keep coming. And that's why people get on that train of PPI where they have to take it for the rest of their lives. There's also some scary stuff that's connected PPIs with neurodegeneration. And I think that's probably because people are killing off their healthy gut flora. I mean, I don't know that, but it makes sense to me. Um, have you read of Mimi Kay and her story of reversing her Parkinson's after going carnivore? I love meat. I have a slide on meat if you want to see it. I think the studies that said red meat is bad for you were looking, and I know it. They were looking at processed meats. Processed food is bad for you, but red meat, I think is health food, grass fed, great, even grain finished. It's cows are magical. Um, how useful is yogurt? Awesome, love yogurt, but get the high fat. Okay, fat is health food. Fat is brain food. The brain is mostly made of fat. It's all myelin. It's just the coverings of your cells, of your neurons. Catch Dr. Mike Oken at our symposium. Yes, do that. What would an anti-inflammatory diet consist of? All right, I think I need to share another slide. Meat and fruit are sort of my favorites. Let's see. Favorite nootropics. This is about the red meat. Worst foods for Parkinson's. So I'll tell you, remember I said I wasn't going to tell you what to eat. I was going to tell you what not to eat. All right, don't drink almond milk. If it's not organic, this is one of the most complex laden foods in America. I really think this might be the worst food for people with Parkinson's is almond milk. Processed meats, conventional corn, wheat, and soy. We talked about that. Non-organic rice products. This is all based on that discussion that I had with you all about rotenone, about complex 1 inhibitors, and about trying to avoid pesticides. And really what I did is I just went in and I tried to find the foods that are most likely to be adulterated, exposed, and had the highest levels when they were tested. This is all data driven. So fried foods, predatory fish, I would be careful with. Salmon is much better. I was actually surprised to read that, is that salmon has much lower levels of heavy metals. But you should try to go for wild caught if you can afford it. And I think, okay, a little bit about the Mind diet. It's good because there's no processed food, similar to the Mediterranean diet, and that you don't eat. It doesn't include seed oils. I think it's bad for demonizing red meat, milk, cheese, and butter. And also, there's too much focus on grains. Okay, I'll stop sharing. I'll continue to read. Why is the U.S. still allowing the use of glyphosate? I don't know. I imagine it's because of lobbying. If you look at the average income in DC, it's like $215,000. There's no state in the union that's even half of that. And that's because these people are, I heard them called the Beltway Bandits one time. I mean, that's really what it is. They're advocating for the use of poisons that are making us sick and, affecting my family. And it's incredibly upsetting. Organic would be much better for almond. Yeah. What's a good alternative milk? If you can't do regular milk, I'm not going to say raw milk. I mean, I have heard that there's people who, if they can't tolerate regular milk because of lactose issues, that they can tolerate raw milk, which is kind of interesting, but I'm not advocating for that. I don't like soy, certainly. Maybe cashew. I think maybe a cashew milk would be a better alternative, but I would just drink water at that point if you really can't do milk. I have a slow motility score, 120. I wonder how this something can be improved. I also find one doctor will prescribe one prescription while another prescribes an opposite one. Yeah. Um, I'm not a gastroenterologist, but I would look into your diet. I would keep a journal. I would get a app or um, my favorite journal, which is just a book with empty pages. And I would write down literally every day what I ate and how I felt. And I would look for correlations. I would do it for a month. I would find connections and figure out what I did that made me feel better. Are almond butter and almonds okay to eat? I don't like non-organic almonds. I think the more processed it is, the more likely you are to concentrate pesticides. So butter is probably worse than raw almonds. Milk is much worse than butter. What about vegetables? My favorite vegetables are all fruit. I like avocados, tomatoes, squash, cucumbers. They're all fruits. But I'm not anti-vegetable. I think many people feel good eating vegetables. Vegetables are, um, I'll tell you the big problems with vegetables. Number one, they're very low in nutrition. So you're eating them for fiber basically, or for taste because you like the way they taste. And this is like the vegetables, like broccoli and celery. There's a reason kids hate them, right? I always tell people, I tell patients, like, if you give a 2-year-old a strawberry, do they ever eat the little green part at the top? No, not in a million years. That's the vegetable. Okay. Um, anyway, the problem with it is, number one, there's what are called plant defense compounds. So things like oxalates, if you eat like a ton, if you're like juicing spinach, you're going to end up with kidney stones probably. So there's these plant defense compounds. Celery, if you juice celery or if you eat a ton of celery, you can end up with skin damage. People get sunburned, especially if they're on the beach. Like, watch out. And then there's a number of others, thiocyanates, things that can damage your thyroid. So that's number one. Number two is actually foodborne illness. So if you ever, read about foodborne illness, it's mostly E. coli and spinach. If you've ever had a bug in your food, 90% of the time it was in salad. I'm right. Um, so I don't know. I don't love them. I'll eat it if it's forced on me. Um, but it's low in nutrition. We call it crunchy water in my family. Low in nutrition, expensive, high in foodborne illness, meat and fruit. That's, meat, animal foods and fruit. How much? Okay, hang on. We're still moving. All right. When you say that almond milk is the absolute worst, is that because almonds are being poisoned with pesticides? Yes. They use a complex 1 inhibitor on almonds that are not organic in order to prevent mites, and so it ends up in the on the almond, and you can wash them. I definitely think that would help a lot. Um, what about natural peanut butter? I don't hate peanuts. It's a nut. Nuts can cause issues with diverticulitis. I had a friend who just went in the hospital with diverticulitis, life-threatening. So nuts and seeds are sort of like the no-nos for diverticulitis. But I don't hate it. Peanut butter is a nice source of protein. How much living food like kefir should you drink per day? I try to take a swig. I buy a bottle. It lasts me a week. I take one big swig in the morning. Try to keep myself regular. I think I'm caught up. What is a PPI? Proton pump inhibitor. That's medication that blocks the formation of acid in your stomach. Acid is what keeps the lower esophageal sphincter closed. So if you block the formation of acid, you allow yourself to, well, there's a lot of things you do. First of all, anything that comes in your stomach is not going to get killed. And we know that everything we eat has viruses, bacteria, and all different problematic compounds. You really need that acid to break it down. You want it to kill everything, kill what it's supposed to kill. Plus, you need the acid in order to activate the right enzymes. There's a lot of enzymes that break down protein, turn it into, the peptides that it needs to be. They break the peptide bonds that turn it into amino acids. You can't absorb protein. You absorb amino acid. We talked about that earlier. So if you don't have acid in your gut, you're going to be protein deficient. You're going to be weak. You're going to be sarcopenic. And that's really what aging is. This is something I think is worth talking about, is that I see Parkinson's as a disorder of dysregulated aging, accelerated aging. I think everyone who made it to 140 would have Parkinson's. Anybody who makes it to 140, 150 will have Parkinson's. But what happened that you got it earlier? Is something went wrong. Some exposure, some genetic risk, or some kind of environmental exposure triggered it to happen faster. So I don't remember what I was talking about before that. Sorry. It was something good though. I remember that. Okay, aloe vera juice. Oh, PPIs. Um, was that what I was talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
So PPIs, yeah, they don't allow you to absorb protein. So the dysregulated aging, the accelerated aging is really a loss of muscle tissue. And so what's called sarcopenia is where you lose your muscle bulk. And the problem with that is basically the sugar has to go into the muscles. When you eat food, it has sugar. The carbohydrates get turned into sugar. The sugar is supposed to go into your muscles to fuel them. If you don't have muscles, it goes into your brain and causes small vessel disease, which is one of the causes. When I do thumbs up, I guess I get a little thing. That's very weird. Um, it causes damage to the brain called small vessel disease. It causes damage to the nerves called peripheral neuropathy. It causes damage to the joints called arthritis. And so that to me is what inflammation is. Um, that's basically caused by sarcopenia. It's caused by a loss of muscle bulk. What about aloe vera juice? Love it. I love it. That's actually the treatment to GERD, truly. So if you have reflux, first of all, you need to look at your diet. You need to stop eating so close to bedtime. You need to go for a walk after dinner and not go to bed. Not lay flat after dinner. Go for a walk. Um, and if you can't, just move your body. Sit in a chair and move your body. Um, what did you say you drink to stay regular? Goat milk, kefir. I like kombucha also. I keep a big glass bottle of kombucha, about half gallon, in the fridge. Some people make their own. My mom used to make her own when I was growing up. That's pretty cool. Is there a difference between kimchi's, organic versus processed? Oh, um, I don't know. I have one that's called like mother-in-law's kimchi that I love. It's so good. It's crazy. I put it as a side for everything. I have it on the side of my eggs in the morning. I have an omelet with a side of kimchi. I'm a nut. What about papaya enzymes? Beautiful. I don't know. I haven't heard of it. What about ranitidine? It's also blocking, it's a histamine blocker. So I think slightly better, but antihistamines can cause cognitive impairment. Is taking ivermectin okay to kill parasites in your body? I have no idea. I would say keep your stomach acid functioning, and you don't have to worry about the parasites as much. I'm a young left hemi stroke survivor after ICH. Status post softball size AVM rupture. Same part of my brain that was affected, same part is fascinating. Do you feel this information related to nutrition, creatinine, et cetera, is relatable? Ooh, that is really tricky, Lindsay. Uh, um, I say, keep the stuff about trying to optimize your health, but a lot of the talk was about the metabolic stresses that damage alpha-synuclein, the metabolic stresses that damage the substantia nigra dopaminergic neurons. And if those cells are taken out by another type of disease process, like a stroke, I think some of this stuff probably won't apply. Are there any nuts safe to eat? Yeah, I mean, I think the one that I read that was the worst was almonds, but really, yeah, pistachios, maybe they're better. It's harder to wash them, right? Since they have a shell. But maybe since they have a shell, they're safe because the pesticide doesn't get on the inside. I don't know. I haven't read that much about nuts. I don't actually like nuts that much, so I didn't really, I've never been asked. This is great. Look, wait, hang on.
Yay.
I'm writing it down.
Well, that is
Nuts.
something I always share for the Michigan Parkinson's Foundation is they should be keeping a diary of everything, really. I mean, how do your medications, do they work? Do they stop working? If you ate something, was it as effective? I think that's so important and I think helpful for your doctors to know that too, right?
Definitely. Yeah, no question. Um, the
Well,
apps are
I
good too.
I think this is great. I want to be very respectful of your time. I thought this was an excellent program. For those of you who maybe joined us a little late, I just wanted to mention this is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel as well. Um, yes, so that's one of the answers there. There is one more question that someone asked about
Oh, that pudding is
pudding.
amazing. Is that the recipe from was that from the Oaken book? Uh
Um,
was it Living with Parkinson's or
I
one of his earlier books? I remember I saw this recipe. Or I think it was this one. Or did you make that up, Mary? Whatever it is brilliant.
Yes. Well,
Uh,
and on that note, yes, for those of you who might have missed that, I mentioned that we referred to Dr. Mike Oken many times. He is our keynote speaker at the April Parkinson's Awareness or Parkinson's Symposium in at Laurel Manor in Livonia, a tongue twister. And he is an author, very well respected movement disorder specialist and researcher. Again, author. And this is the book that we are going to do our book club about, Ending Parkinson's Disease. And just another shout out for making sure that you are watching your emails, your newsletters, social media, because all of this information will be coming out and you'll be able to register and join us for a lot of our activities throughout April. Okay, I think that we have to wrap up. See a couple more questions, but I think that we'll probably have to end it. Let's see.
that's awesome, Mary. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. And
What?
she shared the recipe for, I believe, constipation and Parkinson's.
Oh,
It's
okay.
really
Great.
fantastic stuff. I've seen it somewhere else, I think. Anyway, I am just bowled over with the number of people who came today and stayed. I just wanted to say how grateful I am for all of you. I think you're my inspiration. Um, you're the people who make this career so meaningful and make it worth it. And um, I would love to hear each of your stories individually. I think um, I just can't even imagine what you've all been through and how much um, fortitude you all have and what it takes to keep fighting and to be here and keep showing up. And that goes for caregivers and support folks and people that are going through it. So um, really appreciate it. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you, Dr. Goldzser. We appreciate you so much. We need more like you, and I think there might be a couple of people on this call that might have upcoming appointments with you, so they'll share their story.
Can't wait.
But
Can't
with
wait.
that, thank you again. I hope
Thank
everyone
you.
has a wonderful night. Take care.
I know. Thanks so much, Julia.
Sure.